Okie smoky boys, I'm going to do my absolute best here to answer a question I've been getting a lot recently, and that is, when should I imprint my gear? And I'm going to talk about this from the early game into the late game and talk about the philosophy behind why I make the decisions that I do personally, because there's not a definitive answer. I can't just tell you like level 35. So let's start with the early game. And for me, this is like tier 1, tier 2, levels 1 to 50. Now, you have to deal with a unique problem in this level range because it's the only one where the gear drops level up with you. So as you go from level 5 to 10, the gear goes from level 5 to 10, roughly. And that means that you'll be replacing it quite often because it will get quite a bit more powerful, especially with your main hand weapon, because you'll be chasing damage per second. This is very important for increasing your damage output. And with other types of gear, you need to chase the armor because that is your main survivability tool in this early game. There are exceptions to the rule. Jewelry here doesn't scale as aggressively, so if you find a really good ring at like level 10, level 15, you can actually take this pretty much all the way to level 50. So these are prime candidates for imprinting. The same goes for any offhand weapon that you have. So for the barbarian, for example, you may be using a core skill that uses a certain weapon type, and that will be your primary source of damage. Therefore, the other weapons can be considered offhand or almost just stat sticks. So the only thing that's important here is the modifiers, and good modifiers are pretty hard to come by. So if you end up rolling a pretty good weapon modifier wise at like level 15, level 20, again, you may end up keeping that for a pretty long time. So these can be worth considering for imprinting. Gear, it's not completely out of the realms of possibility, but when it comes to like your armor, it's a lot less likely that you'll get something that you're going to keep for a really, really long time because, again, you need to keep up with those armor requirements. But maybe you'll get a good pair of boots or a good pair of gloves that you'll then, you'll imprint and you'll keep those while upgrading everything else. Though this does tend to change the closer you get to 50, you will start having more and more legendaries. But then that is also because at that point, you're also getting enough resources behind you to be able to afford pretty regular Codex of Power legendary imprints. So those are the ones from your book that are free. As far as should you use aspects, if you have duplicates, I would say it's okay to do so. If you have max rolls, so if you have like an aspect that is rolled like the highest in its range, I would go ahead and try and keep those for like really exceptional pieces of gear, especially if you're very close to moving up a tier. If you're like near a capstone dungeon, so if you're like 48 to 50, 68 to 70, and you're about to go to tier 3 or tier 4, pocket these then, because putting this on a new sacred piece of gear, and for those of you who don't know, when you move to tier 3, you unlock a new sort of tier of item as well, which is sacred. These are much, much more powerful. And interestingly, sacred items and ancestral, which is the tier 4 version, these actually roll the same stat ranges regardless of what level you get them when you get to that tier. So a level 50 sacred could be just as good or even better than a level 65 sacred. So yeah, you don't want to deprive yourself of that opportunity of maybe having a piece of gear that you're going to use for the next 20 to 30 hours just because you used your aspect on just a bum old regular legendary. So pocket them, especially if you're close to going up a tier. But as soon as you go up to a tier and you start getting sacreds, then absolutely do start using like your good aspects, and then change your kind of behavior based on as you approach the next tier. So when you start getting like 65, 68, okay, maybe start dialing it back, waiting until you're into that next tier and getting those pieces of gear, getting those ancestrals, and then imprinting those, so you're not just sat with a bunch of them in your bank, because that's happened to me where I've had like amazing gear and no imprints. So that can happen, especially on things that you can't find in your Codex of Power. I'm thinking about things like Bold Chieftains here. This is one prime example. Max roll Edge Masters, for example. There are a few others out there that can't be gotten from the Codex of Power. Limitless of Rage. You want good versions of these in the bank, ready for that next tier of gear. I waffled on a bit there, but it really is that important to keep these in the bank for those extra big upgrades. One thing I did kind of fail to mention is that when you're going from tier 2 to tier 3, that's sort of like level 48 to 50 range, there is going to be a lot of temptation to actually apply your aspects because it's a pretty big jump forward in difficulty. But try your best to just make use of what's in your Codex of Power. It's worth it, believe me. And that is about it. That's kind of the whole philosophy I applied to when I wanted to imprint. If it has remained unclear in some aspects to anybody, then I encourage you to leave a question. I will do my best to answer the comments, or someone else from the community will beat me to it. That's actually started happening, so thank you guys for jumping in on that. It's really cool to see everyone helping each other out. And thank you everyone for the support, man. It's been fucking bonkers recently. So yeah, thank you, man. If you've been supporting the channel in any way, shape, or form, you're the GOAT. Thank you. Yeah, and consider giving it a like or a subscribe if you found this one useful, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.